PA. But first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. It's truly an honor and a privilege to be here. I now live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I just did the math the other day and figured out I've lived over about half my life on the East Coast, which I find odd because I'm a Pacific Northwesterner, and all my friends in the East say you seem like a Westerner, but all my friends back West seem to become an Easterner. That's when I talk too fast. But anyway, so we think a lot more about hurricanes in my part of the country rather than earthquakes, but I'll have a little vignette to tell the earthquakes there. I've done some research on earthquakes, of course, as Lori just shared with you. Those books sound pretty good. I should read them again. You write a book, I forget what you said. But some of what I wrote actually will come through today. And I've been interested in earthquakes for a long time. And in fact, Peter May was my advisor at the University of Washington, and I was one of the first FEMA EERI NEHRP graduate fellows. And I'm eternally grateful to the ERI, to FEMA, to the NEHRP for the opportunity, which really launched my career. I wouldn't be here today were it not for that fellowship, so I really appreciate it. What I also appreciate is that the ERI and the entire community of people that are concerned with earthquake hazards are really open to ideas from other disciplines and from around the world. The openness of ERI to social scientific knowledge and participation is really inspiring. And of course, Peter May got me into this community, and Peter's involvement, many of you know about, and that was quite a role model inspiration to me. Another role model inspiration to me was my father, who was an electrical engineer. And that's how we ended up in Alaska. He worked on airports up there for the state. And for various reasons, math, I wasn't fated to follow his path as an engineer. I think he's amused to know that I was supported by engineers in my research, that my career would take me to a brief spell in the engineering directorate at NSF. And now I sit on several civil engineering PhD committees as an outside member. And I think the deeper I got into working with engineers, the more my father became concerned about the state of engineering practice in the United States. But I think secretly he's kind of proud of it. And I worked as a draftsman for my father briefly in Anchorage, back when you used ink in a drafting machine back in the old days. Then CAD came along and took all the charm and craft out of it to me. Even though it tripled my parents' productivity in the engineering firm. But it's really, again, a privilege and an honor to be here among you. Now, I don't think any earthquake conference should go by without at least one quick picture from the 1964 Alaska earthquake. And this might have been one of the things that triggered my interest. Of those of you who know Anchorage, those of you who know the 64 earthquake, know this is the north side of 4th Avenue. We moved there in 1970, and it was still fresh in people's minds, but really not that fresh, because the go-go years in Alaska had really started. But my fascination with public policy also started in Alaska because the 70s and 80s and the 60s in Alaska were an incredible time to be there. Alaska, when we had moved there, had only been a state for 11 years. It's not something I really thought of. It had only been a state for 11 years. The Constitutional Convention had been held a couple of years before. And it's a young state with a lot of incredibly interesting, civic-minded people. And most governors of Alaska have been really remarkable people, regardless of party or regardless of where they came from. There's a real history of civic-mindedness and of people solving problems, and that got me really interested in public policy, so that's why I think I study what I do. I always found politics, at least until about 2 years ago, I found politics really interesting. Now let's set up the discussion with the elephant in the room this morning, which is this. The NEHRP, or the National Earthquake Hazard Reduction Act, hasn't been reauthorized since 2004 by Congress. It's still funded, but it's not been reauthorized. And if you look at this chart, in the 1980s, the program was reauthorized about every other year, or a little, on average, right? But look at these reauthorizations, and then it slows down a little bit in the 1990s. And then once in 2004 was the program reauthorized, but it's clear the federal government isn't really paying a lot of attention at the highest levels to earthquake policy, and the question is why? Now, in asking this question, I hope to leave you with some ideas about how we might act while earthquakes are both fresh on the agenda and when they're not fresh on the agenda, in other words, when we haven't had a recent one, and how we can be prepared for the next time we do have a big earthquake. Now, what I want to do here is talk about what we mean by public policy. public policy is something social scientists study, and we conceive of a public policy process in a particular way. And the sort of questions you're interested in here as earthquake people, scientists, social scientists, planners, government officials, are public policy questions. And one of the questions we ask as social scientists is, you know, how much attention does this get, and should it get more attention? You got to start with Thomas Dye, political scientist, defined public policy as what governments choose to do or not to do. And I put not in italics because choosing to not do something is itself a choice, right? So there's a lot of things we choose not to do in politics. We choose not to have, in Seattle, for example, a fully fledged URM program yet. We're working on it. We're not there yet. Some communities have chosen not to adopt certain code committees. Certain communities choose not to adopt certain land use planning practices, things like that. So there are choices that are made affirmatively, but there are choices that are made affirmatively to not do something because it costs too much or because people don't pursue the risk in a particular way or whatever. So then, once we've decided in our system whether government should do something or not, then the next question is which level of government should deal with it, because we live in a federal system. There's a federal government, the states, and the local governments. Now, the relationship between state and local government is not the same as the relationship between the federal and state governments. That's defined in our Constitution. There's a lot more sort of divided power between the states and the feds, whereas state by state, there's a high degree of variation about how much autonomy local governments have. But still, the point is that you have a lot of different levels of government. And sometimes we say that's not an appropriate thing for, let's say, the federal government to be dealing with. The states and locals should do it, and I'll talk more about it in a minute. Now, the other thing that this depiction of public policy speaks to is the notion of it being problem-driven. Most people make an argument that public policy should be undertaken because there's a problem. And the politics of problem definition is really important in my field because we're often arguing about why problems exist. And the way that humans work is we tell stories about why problems exist. We tell stories about how they came about. We tell stories about what happened that was bad. We tell stories about what might happen if something happened. We don't do something. Just the other day I was having dinner with a friend of mine, and I had just learned about the problem of triple walls on single-story, crawl-space houses in California and Los Angeles. And I asked her, hey, have you retrofitted your triple walls? She said, no. And we looked it up and found a place that would do it. You know, that's the kind of storytelling we talk about. You know, stories about, you know, how to fix your house, stories about how to improve the infrastructure, things like that. But they're all about problems, and government exists to solve problems, at least in the popular conception. Now, the textbook policy process is next. This is a chart we use in a lot of our introductory public policy textbooks. And this looks like very much like a very orderly path diagram of how the public policy process works. And to preview it, this isn't how it really works, right? It's a lot more complex than this. Steps can be skipped. The arrows don't always work in one direction. It's not unidirectional. This looks like the old how a bill becomes a law. There's Bill up there. Pointing at the wrong screen. Screens are weird. But there's Bill up there. Remember Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law? It's very simplified, right? Congress is a lot more complicated than that. The public policy process is a lot more complicated than that. So as a social scientific model, it has some problems. But what's really good about this model is it helps us to focus on particular things to pay attention to. So for example, in this model, you have issues that emerge on the agenda. So issue emerges, like you might have a big earthquake, which then reaches the agenda. And I'm talking today a lot about agenda setting. And I'll talk about what agenda setting means in a moment. And so you have a big event, like a big earthquake, but other ways that agenda setting works are things like, increase in disease rates, or the numbers of fatalities in car accidents or something like that. So the indicators are a problem. And then you also have the actions of policy entrepreneurs or policy actors that go out into the world and make an argument about public policy, about why we should do things. And there's a lot of public policy entrepreneurs in our community, and a lot of people who speak about issues and elevate them in the agenda, like Professor Abramson's talk the other day about seismic hazard analysis, or Jack Bailey's talk about how all the tall buildings aren't going to fall down. or not even 10%. I'm talking a minute about the role of journalism in this, but it gets on the agenda, right? And this is often the culmination of years of work. So it can be really frustrating because you do all this work and all of a sudden, bang, one day everyone's talking about it, but that's the way the process works. What we mean by the agenda is the list of everything that the public and policymakers are attentive to at any given time. The agenda is finite. There's only so much space on the agenda. So we know that the earthquake problem rises on the agenda when big earthquakes happen. It's kind of axiomatic. The goal of those who want to improve policies to move the idea from the issues about earthquakes from the discussion agenda, if you will, the public agenda, to the institutional agenda, which is the list of things that a government body is taking up, you know, like a building code change or a retrofitting program or you know, vulnerability study or whatever, those things that actually a decision is going to be made about. If a big event gets a lot of attention, we tend to call it a focusing event. That's a term taken from a guy named John Kingdon, who I'll share with you in a second. But a focusing event can gather a lot of attention, policymaker and mass public attention to an event, and lead to change. A classic example is the 1933 Long Beach earthquake. It's a focusing event. It damaged schools. It got a lot of public pressure in the field out of its path. Okay. So you have an event like that. Agenda setting is important because if an issue doesn't get on the agenda, nobody's going to do anything about it. So you've got to fight your way onto the agenda, and you've got all these other things to worry about. I remember reading a study, I can't remember who did it back in the 80s, where they asked Southern California or California municipalities what the most important problems were in their communities. Traffic, environmental degradation, things like that. And earthquakes, in most cases, fell below the proliferation of adult bookstores as the most important problem in California communities. So the solution is simple. Once you look at the adult bookstore problem, then you can move the earthquake issue up the agenda. And we found that odd, of course, considering the risk profile. It wasn't all communities, but you can see where there's a lot of things that people could be paying attention to. And a lot of people try to keep issues off the agenda, not so much on earthquakes, but a competition about the agenda is to get things on the agenda and to keep it off the agenda as well. There are so many levels of things that you can contend with it. The fact that earthquakes don't happen every day really keeps things low on the agenda. Now let's assume the issue gets on the agenda long enough to result in some sort of a government program. In other words, an alternative policy is selected, it's enacted, and then it's implemented. But implementation, we've learned, isn't automatic either. It requires the efforts of people, generally the state and local governments, to implement public policy. And one of the things and I'll return to this probably in a minute, but one of the things I learned as I was writing this, and something I want to write more about, is that when you get an issue on the agenda, it's important not just for getting the issue onto the agenda for consideration, but also to keep it alive during implementation. And I'm not sure that my field has really made the connection between those two. So I know what I've got to do on the way home today is do a lit search to see if anybody's connected those two things. Because I think it's really important because, you know, you pass something like the knee hurt, right? And then, you know, what happens next? That's really important to find out. Now, here's a different model of the policy process by John Keegan. It's a more sophisticated model. It's called the streams approach to the public policy process. And the basic idea is this. You've got there are three streams in public policy of things happening at about the same time over time. There's the problem stream, which is all the problems that exist out in the world that people are talking about, for which the government or somebody can do something. Earthquakes and natural disasters are problems, right? Then there's a policy stream that consists of all the ideas we can implement, we can enact and implement to do something about the problem. All the ideas out there, you can think of all the ideas. All these ideas that are generated here are in the policy stream, right? And they're out there ready to be harnessed. And then the politics stream contains notions of current political alignments. For example, you know, in American politics in general, Democrats tend to be a little bit more activist with government than Republicans, and that's a wild generalization, but it holds for most cases. And so under, say, a Republican governor, you might have less, tendency to regulate than you might under a Democratic government, for example. Or the national mood. You know, do people think that government can solve problems, or do people think that government is the problem? You know, we go back and forth on that in American politics a lot. The idea is this, that through the efforts of people like you, policy entrepreneurs, to connect policies to problems during times when the politics are right and the politics are amenable to change, then you open up a window of opportunity for policy change. And one way that the window of opportunity opens is through a focusing event. And this focusing event, like a big earthquake, opens up the ground, softens up the ground, as John King had said, for more attention to the problem. Right? So you have this window of opportunity that opens. It doesn't mean it's going to stay open forever, and it doesn't stay open very long. I'm going to show you something about that later that illustrates that. But that's the opportunity for people to testify before Congress, come up with ideas, things like that. The point is that if proponents for better policy are prepared for an event, you have already a lot of ideas for improved policy in the policy stream when the event happens. In other words, an event by itself isn't enough to improve public policy. What you also need is to have ideas at the ready to hand to people and say, kind of, we told you so, but this event happened, and here's some ideas that would prevent as bad an event from happening in the future. This is what we can do to improve infrastructure performance, or reduce the mobilization of hospitals, or whatever. Right? You've got ideas ready to go. We also know that these windows open when you have a champion in government. And if you go back to the history of the National Earthquake Hazard Reduction Act, and all that, you see a wide range of people who got involved, and I can't name them all, but two really jump out to political scientists as being really pivotal to this process. One was Senator Alan Cranston from the state of California, and the other was Frank Press, who was a science advisor to Jimmy Carter, and he was I think he was a geophysicist, right? And he was an advisor to many presidents, and worked at a high level. And those folks and a lot of other folks were the motive force behind ultimately the collection of ideas that already existed into the NEHRP. And the question I would ask us today then is, who are our champions today? And there are out there. Just, if you're a champion for better policy, make yourself available to people and to talk to your elected officials and to get involved in the process. The point is, the bottom line is that disasters themselves are not enough to move ideas forward in the agenda. You need a policy community to talk about these issues and to come up with some ideas. Now, I read a book, some of this comes from a book by a guy named Carl Henry Geschwin called California Earthquakes, which is really interesting. Some of you who are more familiar with that history may want to read it and maybe tell me where you may have got the story right or wrong. It's an incredibly readable book. It's absolutely fascinating. And he talks about the 1906 earthquake and the things that happened after it. So on the slide, I've got a few sort of key events that happened in the policy community. Starting in 1906, the Seismological Society, or Seismological Association, it was founded, EERI was founded in 49, and as Geschwin tells it, I'm afraid to tell this story in front of the EERI because the story might be wrong, but it was a split from the seismologists and the engineers. They kind of wanted to go in different directions, and that's fine. And in 1957, you had the Vela Uniform Program, which was around 1957, which is the seismic detection of nuclear blasts and whatnot, but also the International Geophysical Year. Interdisciplinary disaster science really got started in sociology and in geography and in political science and a lot of other disciplines in the 60s. And also in the 1960s, the policy sciences, my field, emerged. And the idea of the policy sciences was that with improved scientific study of policy problems and their solutions, we would have improved public policy. It hasn't quite worked out that way. Politics still exists. And why does politics still exist? Because we have a representative democracy. And as we heard the other morning, I think it was Monday morning's panel, our role here is to provide information to decision makers, not to make the decisions for them. And so the policy sciences were a little technocratic, but did lay a foundation for better analysis of public policy. And all this is happening about the same time, right up to the 1964 Alaska earthquake, which led to the giant set of National Academy of Sciences reports on all these aspects of the earthquake. I remember poring over those in the library at the University of Washington. They're fascinating. Written by people that my mom knew from her civic activities in Alaska, actually, Lydia Selkirk and others. And then in 1970, by 1970, EERI became a professional society rather than a membership society, like an invite society to join it. Then you had the Silmar earthquake, and I'm leaving a lot of stuff out, but soon thereafter you merged NOAA and USGS's earthquake activities to Menlo Park. And then by 1977, you had the NEHRA and the NEHRP. I'm using the terms interchangeably, right? One is the act and one is the program. I just want to be they're kind of the same thing. The point I want to make is that a lot of groundwork already existed before the 1964 and 71 earthquakes. The earthquake policy or program or whatever you want to call it just didn't spring forth out of the ground. It's a bad metaphor. After the 64 earthquake. It existed already, and the community was able to take advantage of it. Take advantage of those advances. And the nation was able to draw upon the incredible amount of expertise that this community brings to bear. Now, this is taken from the NEHRP office in a Congressional Research Service report, and this basically shows all the organization of NEHRP activities organized by R&D, research, and then implementation on the green is implementation. It's a bit of a wiring diagram. I don't want to get into it too deep, except to say that this, to me, is the beginnings of a depiction of what we call the policy community. That is the policy community of all the people that are involved in debating and talking about and coming up with ideas about public policies relating to earthquakes, right? Another way to depict it is in this chart, which shows the three basic functions: research, development, and implementation, and the lead NEHRP agencies. So on the left, NIST, NSF, USGS, etc. And then implementation, NIST, FEMA, USGS, etc. You can see the chart. And then there's a relationship between the earthquake risk reduction partners and the natural and built environments, and then earthquakes happen to that system, right? And then they all, relate to each other in some way. I still think this isn't quite a complete depiction of what our policy community looks like, so I attempted to do that, and it looks something like this. And so what you have are people like the professional societies, SSA, ERI, ASCE. I'm sure I've left some out, but a few examples. The codes councils and then academic experts provide technical expertise. Then you have the federal NEHRP agencies. You have supporting federal agencies, other agencies that might support this work, and then key congressional leaders who are advocates for better earthquake policy. That's a broad term, but better earthquake policy. At the state level, you have the state emergency management agencies. You have the state seismic safety bodies to the extent they exist, and in small states, but you also have the regional ones. Legislative leaders, state planners, and building officials. The local level is similar. But you also have potential allies among informed citizens, civic organizations, and engaged journalists. And engaged journalists is really interesting because there have been a couple stories about this conference and about the issues related to this conference in the New York Times this week. And many of you see them. If you've not, go look at them. And Jack Bailey gave a talk the other morning about how, no, not all the earthquakes are going to fall down, or the buildings are going to fall down in a San Francisco earthquake. Not all the tall buildings are going to fail. Not even 10% of them are going to fail. But so the story was, I think, has written maybe a little bit apocalyptic. But what we do know is that journalists who stay on a beat for a long time can be real allies in helping the public understand and communicating the science about what it is you do. Now, what I don't show here are the connections between all these groups, because doing so would look like a wiring diagram. But what I want to say is that this group is what we call an advocacy coalition. There's a whole framework in my field called the Advocacy Coalition Framework. The idea is that in public policy, you don't have a lot of groups fighting with each other. You have coalitions fighting with each other. 2 to 4 of them usually in any given field. And I've heard the term coalition building a lot here, so I think it resonates with a lot of what you do. Now, the difference between earthquake policy and other kinds of policies is that we really only have one advocacy coalition. This one, the one you see on the screen. And in fact, Peter May calls highly technical issues like natural disasters, like earthquakes and things like that, or like aviation safety and things like that, are what he calls policies without publics. Because you don't really have a grassroots body of people to organize around them the way they will organize around other issues. Now, a lot of you say, well, look, I'm working with people at the community level and the grassroots groups and whatnot, and that's true, but there isn't likely going to be a social movement or a group of social movements to engage this issue the way the environmental issue rose up or other social issues rose up. In fact, one of the things that this community has learned is sometimes you can ally with the environmental community, although Carl Henry Geschwin has some very interesting stories about how sometimes allying with the community the environmental community really caused problems. So here's that Nehru timeline again with the events, Loma Prieta, Northridge, and the Nisqually earthquake, and it shows that there's probably not much of a correlation between events and reauthorizations. Before we get into that, I also want to make a point about the federal budget process, which is really technical. I took a course on it in the mid-'80s, and I never studied it since. But what I know is this: there's a difference between authorizations and appropriations. Authorization says Congress says it wants to spend this much money. Appropriations is how much is actually getting spent, right? And so the fact that there hasn't been a reauthorization bill doesn't mean that they're not spending money on it. I'll show that in a minute. But it does mean it just hasn't gotten the kind of attention that you need to get an authorization bill on the agenda. But the big problem, of course, is that there's been really no big earthquake since, depending on your reckoning, 2001 or 1994. I'll reckon it to 2001 because they just happened to be in Seattle the day of the Nisqually earthquake, and as soon as I realized the bridges had all failed, I ran downtown and looked at the parapets that all failed. Not all of them, as many of them did. I knew there was a parapet ordinance, and like, okay. My building survived. I lived in a URM in downtown Seattle, much to my mother's chagrin, and I moved out of it. I live in a wood frame. No, I live in a brick house. I live in an unreinforced masonry building in Raleigh, North Carolina, right now. Anyway, so it's been a long time, right? When was the last big earthquake? It hasn't really risen on the agenda. Well, I would be worried about it except for this. And what I'm going to show you here, I'm going to preview what this means. What this means is there's already a community that deals with these issues. Now, this is some data I derived from my book, After Disaster. It's old data, but I have no reason to believe the data have changed. And the point is this. When somebody comes before Congress to testify about earthquakes or hurricanes, if they come to talk about a specific earthquake, they're going to talk about disaster relief. If they're going to come and talk about earthquakes as a phenomenon, they talk about the earthquake program or what became NEHRP and how we need to build it and what we've learned from it, things like that. Overall, it's mostly about this testimony. In hurricanes, the testimony is like this: the food is bad and the portions are small, right? I mean, it's just, the disaster relief is always a problem. There's not the same kind of community that has mobilized around the hurricane hazard to deal with it the same way there is with the earthquake hazard. There's been I made this point in the 90s, and it was very controversial among people who study hurricanes. But the problem, I think, with hurricanes is there's just too many modes, too many different failure modes or damage modes, if you will. You've got wind, you've got water, you've got all kinds of other things. And some of the solutions to earthquakes are really hard, like moving off barrier islands, which would be a really good idea, but it's politically unpalatable. Now, again, events aren't enough. So we had a lot of activity before 64, then 64 happened. We had activity after that. Then after 71, we had activity after that, right? And there's a list of those things that are here. A lot has happened. There's been major accomplishments. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But first I want to ask, what's pushed the issue down the agenda? Why aren't we paying attention to it the way we used to? The obvious reason is that risk perceptions in the United States changed after 9/11. It's exemplified every day by our interactions with TSA agents, for example. Regardless of how you feel about that, I mean, that's a manifestation of what happened after 9/11. So that really drove things down the agenda. And what really then, was a problem was this, that this is the first organization chart of the Department of Homeland Security. That red arrow points to FEMA, which is called the Undersecretary of Emergency Response and Preparedness. FEMA got buried under DHS. FEMA's already kind of in trouble because the James Lee Witt days, kind of the golden age of FEMA, were over, and the Bush administration was kind of reverting back to the way FEMA used to be, and they were putting people in it that maybe were not really qualified to be running FEMA. And there's a long story about Michael Brown and Katrina. I don't want to get into that, although Michael Brown, I think, did get kind of thrown under the bus. But the point is that it was buried pretty far down the organization chart, right? And so FEMA's effectiveness was in question. Well, then Katrina happened, of course, and you have the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Response Act and the reforming of FEMA as a semi-independent agency and things like that. But, you know, a lot of talk about earthquakes as a particular hazard were lost. And then this chart in the New York Times just the other day shows where most natural disaster damage is. And most of it's in the southeast, and most of it is from weather events, floods, hurricanes, windstorms, things like that. You're going to see some red dots in California. There's a few earthquakes in that data set, but a lot of it's fire and flood, right? And so floods get a lot of day-to-day attention. There's a flood insurance program at the federal level. There's no such program at the federal level for earthquakes. And that may be okay, but the point is it's not on the federal government's mind every day. So does the lack of an earthquake mean that no progress has been made? And the answer to that is no. You know this, and I probably don't have to run through it, but this is taken from a report by William Leaf from NEHRP turns 40 in Seismological Research Letters last July. Fascinating article. And these are some of the things, and I won't read them all, but you know, things like improved earthquake characterization are really important. The Advanced National Seismic System, I think, is a real accomplishment of this community. The morphing of NEIS into the infrastructure. A lot of instrumentation, strong motion data. I was reading something about an instrumentation of a building in Anchorage. NEIS does not have that much instrumentation in my hometown. We do better. A lot of the model building codes and all the other products that come out of FEMA that were shown at this exhibit hall in this meeting, it was fascinating just how much FEMA does and how much they do with so few people. I mean, FEMA is not a big agency. One of my favorite products of the last several decades is the Did You Feel It product and the shape maps to the USGS. This is the Mineral Virginia earthquake in 1911, which I did in fact feel in Raleigh, North Carolina. And after I eliminated all the other logical reasons why the ground would move in North Carolina, construction vehicles, the train derailing next to our campus, I went to USGS, and there it was, and there were already reports, and I entered my report as in modern ground motion, probably Mercalli 1, you know, nothing big, but it's a really important public science, public-facing public science thing, and I think it's really good, and that's an accomplishment, and that's ready to be harnessed during the next big earthquake. This is a screenshot just taken the other day of where we stand with the shakeout drills, program scenarios for this fall. And when I grabbed this screenshot for this talk a couple weeks ago, the central United States is well under 100,000 people. Now there's 776,000 people signed up. Over 2 million in California. Washington State jumped up quite a bit. It's, I think, about 220,000 now. Yeah, Oregon up to 166,000 on a proportional basis. I think we'd like to see more people participate in Washington State. But, and then in my region of the country, 353,000 people in the southeast. The northeast has gotten really active. This really bodes well, I think, for the outreach into the community. But the NEHRP is, at this point, 40 years later, a mature program. It's not brand new. It's been institutionalized in federal law. It receives continued appropriations. It has a record of accomplishments. So changes to policy are going to be incremental, and the policy changes contained in the new law are likely to be trailing indicators of the state of the art and not drivers of the state of the art, such as early warning, such as building out a management plan for the NSS, such as mapping programs, and then this report to the Comptroller General on seismic hazards. That'll keep the issue bubbling on the agenda, not at a super high level, but it will be on the agenda, and that's really important. So that's a good thing. Now, this bill has been introduced, but it hasn't been passed in the law yet. So we'll see. Chris Poland and some other folks testified on this down at Huntington Beach at the end of May, and so we'll see if this moves forward. Now, will another earthquake drive this forward on the agenda? Will this bill on the agenda? I think it will. It will spur public interest. It may hasten enactment of the bill. It may hasten changes to disaster policy, but the implementation challenges are going to remain. So to elevate this issue, we have to be prepared to mobilize the community and expand it to other interests, highlight the successes of it, illustrate shortcomings in existing federal policies and state and local policies, and create attention and support for the implementation of the program. Now I'm going to give you like 30 years worth of research and implementation in one slide. by a guy named Malcolm Goggin, who argued in essence that clear messages sent by credible officials to receptive implementers who have resources will implement policies that are supported by the groups, and then therefore the policy will be successful. Clear messages with enough resources, the people who want to act will be successful. The question is, do these conditions exist in the implementation of federal earthquake policies? Well, we do have clear messages, and the people are credible. I think ATC, FEMA, NIST, all these people work together for model codes, all the tools and guidance, all the partnerships and drills and scenarios. Those are all really good. Sufficient resources, I would argue not so much. The National Academy of Sciences in their report said that we need about $309 million a year for this program, and the authorized and appropriated levels. Now, the authorization assumes that we just hold the 2004 authorization level constant. And then you look at the appropriations, and I've inflated this, or I've adjusted it to $2010. And if adjusted for inflation, actually, the amount of money is going down on the earthquake program. So that's something that we should be concerned with. Do we have receptive implementers? At some levels, we do. We have state and local governments. We have private sector. We have individuals in households. Now, Peter May argued, and other people have argued, that the big problem is that state and local governments, have an uneven record of implementation of the tools that have been provided to them by the NEHRP, right? Some communities are more active than others, and so the goal is to try to get more people active. So are the implementers receptive? I would argue they are, but elected officials, remember, have so many things to deal with that it's hard to find room for this issue. They're not opposed to dealing with the issue, they just have other things that people are beating them up over more often every day. Anchorage, for example, right now is a spate of car thefts. That's higher on the agenda than is earthquakes, right? So you've got that problem. Individuals and households, I want to talk about that. Again, my point is that there's a policy without a public. Now, FLASH is a new group that collaborates with, according to their website, over 100 innovative and diverse partners that share its vision of making America a more disaster nation. FLASH is trying to set itself up as a Flash.org as a interest group, if you will, a grassroots movement to improve community and household safety in a range of natural disasters. But we have to take into account that one, it comes out of the earthquake, or the hurricane space initially, and two, it's not as grassrootsy as we might like. It really doesn't bubble up from individuals at the community level. But it's a start, and I think it's a good idea. We may not need a grassroots movement. We know that most people don't think about all issues all the time, but when some reason exists for them to think about it, they will. So again, that's a reason to be prepared for the next big event, so that when it happens, you can say to people, this is what happened. Help them understand, make sense of the event, and what can be done next to prevent as bad a recurrence as it would be if we did nothing. The challenge of implementation is going to be providing the right mix of tools and incentives to local governments to take action. Like FEMA's Earthquake State Assistance Program is really great, for example. It includes help with developing seismic mitigation plans, preparing inventories and conducting seismic safety inspections, updating building codes, increasing hurricane awareness. You're aware of all this. That's available, and so the goal of the community isn't necessarily to create more products, although more products might be good, but the goal of the community is also to help these state and local governments know what resources are available to them in the program and to go out and take advantage of them. So, the implementation challenges, which are also the agenda-setting challenges, are the lack of a public constituency for earthquake protection, in the sense that there's a public constituency for other things. There are small public constituencies, but they're not a broad base, especially in a lot of places where people don't really perceive the earthquake hazard to be as great as it probably is, like the central United States or the Southeast. So what we can try to do is build a public movement for it, or simply be able to engage the government the people, the community at the right time. Second implementation challenge and the second agenda setting challenge is intergovernmental constraints. The federal government can't generally order states to do everything. They can order states to do some things, and they can use the power of the purse, withhold highway money or something like that. But by and large, the federal government has to provide incentives and tools to local governments that they can use to implement improved public policy. Which goes to that last point. We need to either promote the existing set of incentives and tools or create incentives and tools that are more attractive to those places that haven't taken them up. And boy, this meeting is so exciting because there's so many things that are going on at the panels and the discussion that I've had with people. There's a lot of rich information here that just needs to somehow get communicated to people. So let me just conclude by saying this. Increased attention and interest will elevate the earthquake hazard on the agenda and contribute to implementation success. There's two ways to elevate interest and attention. One, wait for another earthquake, which is okay. I mean, it's okay to exploit that event to get people's attention so as to improve future performance. We always say that the best time to talk about mitigation is right after a disaster, even though everybody wants to recover and put things right back together. That's a big challenge. But so we can wait for the next earthquake. But the other thing we can do is be in our communities, provide information to government officials, take advantage of the things you've learned at this meeting and the things you've learned about effective science communication with lay people, with elected officials, things like that. Keep things on the agenda. Are earthquakes the highest problem on the agenda? Probably not, and probably only episodically, but there's a lot you can do to keep it bubbling on the agenda in places it needs to be, and over the long run, enhance both attention and implementation success. So again, I want to thank you. I've really enjoyed being here. It's been a great conference. Enjoy the rest of it. There's only a few more hours left. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Time for a couple of questions? I think we've got 7-8 minutes. We don't. Okay. Well,